Zixithan pressed his 6-clawed fingers against the smooth control panel of his research station. The blue glow from 12 holographic displays lit up his scaled face as data streams flowed past his golden eyes. As the chief military analyst for the Galactic Military Council, he had studied the warfare patterns of over 300 species. Today's assignment seemed routine enough. Another primitive species, he muttered to himself, reviewing the initial reports from the outer rim. The humans had just made first contact with a Kalari trade vessel 3 cycles ago. Standard protocol required a full military assessment before any species could join the galactic community. The reports were thin. Humans came from a small blue planet called Earth, located in an unremarkable star system. They had barely achieved faster-than-light travel, and their weapons technology seemed crude compared to galactic standards. Chemical explosives, metal projectiles, and simple energy weapons. Nothing that would trouble even a basic defense grid. Zixithan pulled up the human data packet that had been transmitted during first contact. It contained their historical records, cultural information, and what they called their military archives. He started with their recent conflicts, expecting to find the usual pattern of territorial disputes and resource wars that most young species engaged in. The first thing that caught his attention was the sheer number of conflicts. In just the last 100 rotations of their planet around their star, humans had fought in dozens of major wars and hundreds of smaller ones. Most species had perhaps 10 significant conflicts in their entire recorded history. Remarkably violent, he noted, but not entirely unusual. Some species went through aggressive phases before achieving galactic readiness. He opened a file labeled World War II and began reading. Within minutes, his golden eyes widened. The scale was incredible. Over 60 million casualties. Entire populations mobilized for war production. Cities destroyed from orbit. No, wait, he checked again. The humans had done this with atmospheric aircraft and primitive explosives. Zixithan leaned back in his chair. In galactic warfare, conflicts rarely lasted more than a few rotations. Armies met in designated zones, fought according to established honor codes, and the losing side surrendered when casualties reached acceptable levels. The winner took the agreed-upon territory or resources, and both sides returned home to rebuild. Clean, efficient, civilized. But this human conflict had lasted 6 rotations. They fought on multiple continents simultaneously. They had deliberately targeted civilian populations. They had continued fighting even when their cities were burning and their people were starving. He opened another file. Vietnam War. Then another. 100 Years' War. Each conflict revealed new patterns that made no sense according to galactic military doctrine. Humans fought without honor codes. They used deception as a primary strategy. They refused to surrender even when victory was impossible. A soft chime indicated an incoming message. General Throck of the Mantic Collective appeared on his communication screen. Zixithan, what is your preliminary assessment of the human military threat? Sir, I need more time to analyze their data. Their warfare patterns are unusual. Unusual how? Do they possess advanced technology we missed? No, sir. Their technology is primitive. But their approach to warfare is unlike anything in our database. General Throck's mandibles clicked impatiently. Explain. They appear to view warfare as a total commitment of their entire society. They mobilize civilian populations, convert industrial capacity to weapons production, and continue fighting regardless of casualties. According to their records, in several conflicts, they sustained losses that exceeded 50% of their military forces. 50%? General Throck's compound eyes blinked rapidly. And they continued fighting? Yes, sir. In some cases, they fought until their casualties reached 90%. There was silence on the channel. In galactic warfare, armies typically withdrew when casualties reached 10%. 20% losses were considered catastrophic. No civilized species continued fighting after losing half their forces. Perhaps their record-keeping is inaccurate, General Throck suggested. I thought so too, sir. But they have extensive documentation. Visual records, personal accounts, detailed statistics. They appear to take pride in recording their conflicts in precise detail. After General Throck disconnected, Zixta returned to the human archives. He found himself drawn deeper into their military history. The more he read, the more disturbed he became. Humans didn't just fight their enemies. They studied them. Every defeat led to analysis and adaptation. They copied successful enemy tactics, improved upon them, and used them in future conflicts. They learned from everyone they fought, constantly evolving their approach to warfare. He found records of something called guerrilla warfare. Small groups of humans hiding among civilian populations, striking at superior forces and disappearing. This violated every principle of honorable combat. Armies were supposed to meet in open battle, not skulk in shadows like criminals did. Then he discovered their concept of scorched earth. Humans would destroy their own resources to prevent enemies from using them. They would burn their own cities, poison their own wells, and devastate their own lands rather than let enemies benefit from conquest. Zixten stared at the data in disbelief. What kind of species destroyed everything they had built rather than accept defeat? He opened a file about something called the Eastern Front from their Second Global War. The casualty figures made him dizzy. Millions dead in single battles. Entire armies destroyed and rebuilt multiple times. Cities besieged for rotations while their populations starved out. By the end of his first day studying human warfare, Zixten felt a strange sensation in his chest. Something like fear, but deeper. These humans weren't just violent. They were relentless. They never truly accepted defeat. Even when conquered, they continued to resist, to plan, to wait for opportunities to strike back. As he powered down his displays for the night, Zixten realized he was no longer conducting a routine military assessment. He was trying to understand something that might change everything the galaxy thought it knew about war. Zixten hadn't slept well in 7 rotations. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw images from the human archives. Soldiers charging across fields into machine gun fire. Cities reduced to rubble while inhabitants fought house by house. Children trained to use weapons before they could properly walk. He entered his research chamber earlier than usual, his scaled hands shaking slightly as he activated the displays. Today he planned to focus on human tactical doctrine, hoping to find some logical framework that would explain their chaotic approach to warfare. Instead, he discovered something worse. Humans didn't have a single tactical doctrine. They had hundreds. Each conflict, each battle, sometimes each day of fighting brought new innovations. They adapted constantly, stealing ideas from enemies and allies alike, combining techniques in ways that should have been impossible. He found a section on something called Blitzkrieg, rapid, coordinated attacks that shattered enemy lines before they could respond. Then he read about defense in depth, layered defensive positions designed to slow and bleed attacking forces. These were opposite philosophies, yet humans had mastered both. They had developed urban warfare techniques for fighting in cities, mountain warfare for fighting in high terrain, desert warfare for arid regions, jungle warfare for dense vegetation, naval warfare for their oceans. They even had theories about fighting in space and on other planets. Despite barely achieving interstellar travel, Zixten pulled up galactic military doctrine for comparison. The Kalari Empire used phalanx formations, unchanged for 3,000 rotations. The Mantid Collective employed swarm tactics based on their insect biology. Each species had developed one primary approach to warfare and stuck with it. Humans seemed incapable of sticking with anything for long. They constantly questioned their own methods, seeking ways to improve or overcome them. They had entire institutions dedicated to studying warfare, filled with individuals whose only job was to think about better ways to kill their enemies. A boss communication chime interrupted his research. Admiral Vextar of the Ethereal Collective requested an immediate conference. Analyst Zixathan, I understand you are studying this new species. I require clarification on their military capabilities. What specific information do you need, Admiral? Standard assessment. Fleet composition, ground force structure, technological capabilities. The usual data for threat evaluation. Zixathan hesitated. Sir, their military structure doesn't follow standard patterns. They have multiple competing military organizations within single governmental units. They maintain separate forces for different environments and roles. Multiple competing organizations? That makes no sense. How do they coordinate military action? That's what I'm trying to understand, sir. In some conflicts, their military branches fought with minimal coordination. In others, they achieved perfect integration. They seem to adapt their command structure to match their strategic needs. Admiral Vextar's translucent form flickered with confusion. You're saying they changed their military organization based on circumstances? Constantly, sir. They have records of completely restructuring their forces multiple times during single conflicts. They promote officers rapidly based on performance rather than breeding or social status. They give command authority to individuals who demonstrate tactical competence, regardless of their background. But that would lead to chaos. Military hierarchy must be stable, predictable. How can soldiers function without knowing their place in the structure? Zixathan looked at his display showing human military formations. I believe they function through something they call initiative. Lower-ranking individuals are expected to act independently when circumstances require it. They're trained to think tactically, not just follow orders. After the Admiral disconnected, Zixathan returned to the archives with growing unease. He began studying human psychological warfare techniques and immediately regretted it. Humans had weaponized fear itself. They used propaganda, disinformation, and terror tactics to break enemy morale before battles even began. They understood that defeating an enemy's will to fight was often more effective than destroying their forces. They had developed techniques for breaking prisoners, extracting information, and turning enemies into allies. They studied their opponents' cultures, religions, and psychological weaknesses, then exploited them systematically. Zixathan found records of conflicts where humans had convinced enemy forces to surrender without fighting, simply by demonstrating the futility of resistance. Other records showed them inspiring desperate last stands through appeals to honor, duty, or survival instinct. Most disturbing were their studies of their own psychology. Humans had analyzed their own motivations, fears, and limitations with the same ruthless objectivity they applied to their enemies. They understood that warfare was as much a mental battle as a physical one. The communication system chimed again. This time, it was General Throck. Zixathan, I've been receiving concerning reports from other analysts. Several have requested transfers after reviewing portions of your research. What exactly are you studying? Human military doctrine, sir. As ordered. I'm told you've been sending supplementary data to military academies across the galaxy. Several instructors have expressed concern about the content. Zixathan felt his stomach contract. He had been sharing relevant excerpts with colleagues, as was standard procedure for significant discoveries. Sir, I felt the information was important enough to warrant broader analysis. Important how? Sir, human warfare concepts challenge fundamental assumptions about military strategy. If our potential enemies studied this data, they could adapt human techniques against us. Are you suggesting these humans pose a direct military threat? No, sir. Their technology is still primitive. But their approach to warfare, if any galactic species adopted human methods, our current military doctrine would be inadequate to counter them. General Throck was quiet for several moments. Continue your analysis, but restrict data sharing until you've completed a full assessment. As the connection closed, Zixton realized what he had done. By sharing human warfare concepts with galactic military institutions, he had already begun spreading an infection. The knowledge of how humans fought was now loose in the galaxy, being studied and analyzed by military minds across dozens of species. He returned to his research, but now with a growing sense of dread. Every new file revealed additional layers of human military sophistication. They had studied every aspect of conflict, from grand strategy to individual psychology. They had turned warfare into a science, constantly evolving and improving. Most terrifying was their concept of total war. When humans committed fully to a conflict, they mobilized their entire civilization. Every resource, every citizen, every aspect of their society became part of the war effort. They had fought conflicts that lasted for rotations, sustaining massive casualties while continuing to innovate and adapt. Zixtham leaned back in his chair, staring at the display surrounding him. He was beginning to understand why no one slept well after studying human warfare. It wasn't just violent or chaotic. It was limitless. Humans appeared to have no boundaries, no restrictions on what they would do to achieve victory. The galaxy's military institutions were built on the assumption that warfare had rules, limits, acceptable parameters. Humans seemed to have discarded all such limitations long ago. The emergency session of the Galactic Military Council convened 15 rotations after Zixithon had submitted his preliminary findings. Representatives from 12 species filled the crystalline chamber, their various forms creating a spectrum of colors and shapes around the central holographic display. Admiral Kethra of the Savani Republic stood at the podium, her silver skin reflecting the chamber's soft lighting. We have gathered to address concerns regarding the human military assessment. Several of our military academies report unusual developments following the distribution of human warfare data. General Throck activated a series of displays showing incident reports. The Volnek Federation's Third Fleet experienced what their commanders describe as strategic paralysis during routine exercises. Their officers could not agree on tactical approaches after studying human asymmetric warfare concepts. Zixton watched from his designated analysis station as the reports continued. He had spent the past week documenting similar incidents across the galaxy. The knowledge of human warfare was spreading through military institutions like a plague, and the effects were becoming impossible to ignore. The Crystalline Hegemony's War College has suspended all tactical instruction, continued General Throck. Their professors report being unable to teach traditional doctrine after exposure to human strategic concepts. Several have requested psychological treatment. Admiral Vexstar's ethereal form flickered with agitation. My own fleet commanders are questioning established battle protocols. They ask why we limit ourselves to honorable engagement when humans achieve superior results through what they call unconventional methods. Because, interrupted Elder Zorn of the Ancient Assembly, his forearms gesturing emphatically, we are civilized beings. We fight with honor within established parameters. We do not become beasts simply to achieve victory. But what if our enemies study human methods? Asked Commander Yix of the insectoid swarm. What if they abandon honor as humans have? Our traditional approaches would be useless against truly adaptive opponents. The chamber erupted in a cacophony of sounds as representatives argued in their various languages. Zixithon felt responsible for the chaos. His research had opened a door that perhaps should have remained closed. Admiral Kethra restored order with a resonant tone that silenced all other voices. Analyst Zixithan, present your complete findings. Zixithan activated his displays, showing warfare statistics that still made him uncomfortable. Human military doctrine is based on adaptation and escalation. They view conflict as a problem to be solved rather than a ritual to be performed. When faced with superior enemies, they do not surrender. They innovate. He pulled up examples of human conflicts, highlighting patterns that defy galactic understanding. During their World War II, when faced with technologically superior opponents, they rapidly developed new weapons, tactics, and strategies. They achieved in rotations what should have taken cycles of development. Impossible, stated General Vorthik of the Reptilian Alliance. Military development requires careful planning, testing, refinement. You cannot simply improvise advanced warfare. Humans disagree, Zixithan replied, displaying production statistics. They converted civilian manufacturing to military production in fractional rotations. They trained millions of new soldiers using accelerated techniques. They developed weapon systems from concept to deployment faster than our most efficient military-industrial complexes. The display showed human innovation timelines that made seasoned military leaders uncomfortable. Advanced aircraft designed and deployed within single rotations. Entirely new categories of weapons developed under combat conditions. Strategic doctrines completely revised based on real-time battlefield experience. They treat warfare as a learning process, Zixithan continued. Every engagement provides data for improvement. They analyze failures more intensively than successes, constantly seeking ways to overcome weaknesses. Elder Zoran leaned forward. And what does this mean for galactic security? Sir, if humans were to study our military capabilities with the same intensity they applied to their own conflicts, they would identify weaknesses we don't know we have. Their approach to warfare optimization is unlike anything in our experience. Admiral Vextar's form flickered more rapidly. You're suggesting they could defeat superior forces through pure adaptation. I'm suggesting they already have, sir. Multiple times. Against enemies with better technology, larger armies, and superior strategic positions. They consistently found ways to overcome advantages that should have been decisive. The chamber fell silent as representatives processed this information. Finally, Commander Yik spoke. What are you recommending? Zixithan had spent sleepless nights considering this question. Sir, I recommend extreme caution in any military interaction with humans. Not because they pose an immediate threat, but because exposure to their warfare concepts appears to be psychologically damaging to galactic military institutions. Explain, Admiral Kethra demanded. Human warfare violates fundamental assumptions about conflict that our military systems depend on. Honor codes, casualty limitations, acceptable objectives, proportional responses. Humans ignore all of these constraints. Military personnel exposed to human concepts report confusion, doubt, and inability to function within traditional parameters. General Throck activated additional displays showing recent incidents. The Mantid Collective's officer training program has experienced a 30% dropout rate since introducing human tactical studies. The dropouts report being unable to accept traditional limitations. On strategic thinking, the Kalari Empire's most prestigious military academy has banned discussion of human warfare after 3 professors suffered psychological breakdowns, added Admiral Vegstar. Meanwhile, Zixithan continued reluctantly. Preliminary reports suggest that military units attempting to implement human-inspired tactics without proper psychological preparation have experienced catastrophic coordination failures. The concepts require a fundamental shift in thinking that most galactic military personnel cannot achieve. Elder Zoran's forearms crossed in a gesture of deep concern. Are you telling us that simply knowing how humans fight is dangerous to our military effectiveness? Yes, sir. Human warfare concepts appear to be cognitively infectious. Once military personnel understand that unlimited escalation and total adaptation are possible, they struggle to operate within traditional constraints. Yet they cannot fully adapt to human methods without abandoning everything that makes galactic civilization stable. The implications hung heavy in the chamber. The galaxy's military institutions had evolved over millennia to maintain order through predictable, controllable conflict. Honor codes and strategic limitations weren't just cultural preferences, they were necessary. Constraints that prevented warfare from consuming entire civilizations. Humans seem to have abandoned those constraints long ago, developing a form of warfare that treated conflict as an existential challenge requiring unlimited response. It was an approach that produced incredible military effectiveness at the cost of everything galactic society considered civilized. Recommendations? Admiral Kethra asked quietly. Zixton took a deep breath. Immediate classification of all human military data. Suspension of tactical studies incorporating human concepts. Psychological counseling for all personnel exposed to human warfare archives. And regarding the humans themselves? Sir, they must never know what we've discovered. If they realized that their military history alone could destabilize galactic civilization, they might view that as a weapon. Captain Sarah Chun of the UES Endeavour studied the massive crystalline structures floating before her ship. 3 months had passed since humanity's first contact with the Kalari trading vessel, and now she was leading Earth's first formal diplomatic mission to the galactic capital. Impressive architecture, commented her tactical officer, Lieutenant Rodriguez. Those defense platforms look like they could vaporize our entire fleet without breaking a sweat. Let's hope diplomacy works better than firepower, Sarah replied, though she shared his concern. Humanity's small fleet of 12 ships looked pathetic compared to the hundreds of vessels surrounding the galactic capital. The communication system activated with a complex harmonic pattern that their translation computers converted to standard English. Human vessel, you are cleared for docking at Diplomatic Station 7. Please maintain current heading and reduce velocity to approach speed. As they docked, Sarah noticed something odd about the station's design. The docking facilities seemed hastily modified, with obvious additions and reinforcements that didn't match the original architecture. More concerning, she could see numerous military vessels in positions that suggested heightened security rather than ceremonial honor. Ambassador Williams joined her in the airlock, adjusting his formal diplomatic uniform. Any idea what we're walking into, Captain? The galactic representatives have been polite but extremely formal. No casual conversation, no cultural exchange. Just procedural discussions about trade agreements and territorial boundaries. The airlock cycled, revealing a reception chamber filled with representatives from species humanity had never seen before. The diversity was stunning. Crystalline beings that rang like bells when they moved. Ethereal creatures that seemed more energy than matter. Insectoid forms that clicked and buzzed in complex patterns. At the center stood a tall, scaled humanoid with golden eyes that seemed to avoid direct contact with the human delegation. He stepped forward and spoke in careful, measured tones. I am Zixton, military analyst for the Galactic Council. I will be your primary liaison during these proceedings. Something in his voice made Sarah's military instincts twinge. She had heard that tone before, from officers who had seen things that changed them, who carried knowledge that weighed on their souls. The formal ceremonies proceeded smoothly enough. Trade agreements were established, territorial boundaries confirmed, and cultural exchange protocols initiated. But throughout the process, Sarah noticed that military personnel seemed unusually tense whenever humans were mentioned. During a break in negotiations, she approached Zixithan privately. "I hope you don't mind me saying, but your military representatives seem nervous. Is there some concern about humanity's intentions?" Zixithan's golden eyes flickered, and for a moment his composed demeanor cracked. "Captain Chun, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course. In your military training, were you taught about acceptable casualty rates?" The question was so unexpected that Sarah needed a moment to process it. "Acceptable rates? I suppose we learn about cost-benefit analysis, but the goal is always to minimize casualties while achieving objectives. But if minimizing casualties meant accepting defeat," Sarah frowned, "that would depend on what was at stake. If we're talking about survival, about protecting our families and our way of life, then we do whatever it takes." Zixithan seemed to sag slightly, as if her answer confirmed his worst fears. "Whatever it takes," he repeated quietly. "Is there something specific you're concerned about?" "I can assure you that humanity has no aggressive intentions toward the galactic community." "No," Zixithan said quickly. "No, your intentions are not the issue. It's your capabilities that concern us." Before Sarah could ask what he meant, Ambassador Williams approached with several galactic representatives, and the private conversation ended. That evening, in her temporary quarters aboard the diplomatic station, Sarah reviewed her mission reports with growing confusion. Every interaction with galactic military personnel had been marked by an odd combination of respect and fear. They treated humanity like a dangerous but necessary ally, maintaining careful distance while being scrupulously polite. A soft chime indicated an incoming communication. To her surprise, it was Admiral Kethra herself, the supreme military commander of the galactic community. "Captain Chun, I hope you will forgive this irregular contact. I wish to speak with you privately about a matter of mutual interest." "Of course, Admiral. How can I help?" "I understand that humanity is considering joining the Galactic Defense Coalition. Your species would be welcome, of course, but I wanted to discuss the nature of that participation." Sarah sensed careful preparation behind the Admiral's words. "What specifically did you have in mind?" "We would like to propose that human military personnel serve primarily in advisory roles rather than direct combat positions. Your tactical insights would be invaluable, but we believe your greatest contribution would be in strategic consultation." "Are you saying you don't trust human soldiers in combat?" "Quite the opposite, Captain. We're saying we trust them too much." The cryptic response left Sarah more confused than before. "I'm not sure I understand." Admiral Kethra paused for a long moment. "Captain, has anyone in your delegation reviewed galactic military doctrine?" "Not in detail. We were told it wasn't necessary for these initial negotiations." "Perhaps that was wise." "Captain Chun, I want you to understand something important. Humanity's acceptance into the galactic community is not conditional on your military capabilities. You are welcome here, regardless of your ability to contribute to our defense." "Thank you, Admiral. But I'm still not clear on what you're trying to tell me." "I'm telling you that we've learned a great deal about human warfare, Captain. More than we expected. More than we were prepared for. And what we learned has changed things." Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Change things how?" "The galactic military structure has undergone significant reorganization in the past months. Many traditional institutions have been modified. We found it necessary to establish new psychological support systems for military personnel. We've had to revise our understanding of what warfare actually means." "Admiral, are you saying that learning about human military history somehow damaged your military?" Another long pause. "I'm saying that knowledge can be as dangerous as any weapon, Captain. And sometimes, the most dangerous knowledge is discovering that your fundamental assumptions about reality were wrong. The connection ended, leaving Sarah staring at her communication screen in bewilderment. Over the following days, pieces began to fall into place. Human military advisors were assigned to every major galactic military installation, not to learn from a galactic doctrine, but to help galactic forces understand their own limitations. Human tactical manuals became classified documents, accessible only to specially trained personnel. Most telling was the establishment of what galactic officials carefully termed adaptive warfare protocols, essentially permission structures, that allowed military commanders to ignore traditional constraints when facing truly desperate situations. Sarah began to realize that humanity hadn't joined the galactic community as another member species. They had become something closer to military consultants for a civilization that had suddenly discovered their entire approach to warfare was inadequate. The final piece came during a private dinner with Zixathan on her last night at the station. The military analyst had clearly been struggling with something throughout the visit, and finally found the courage to speak. "Captain Chun, I want you to know that studying human warfare has been the most educational and terrifying experience of my career. Your species has achieved something that seems impossible. You've made war itself into an evolutionary process." "I'm not sure that's something to be proud of," Sarah replied honestly. "Perhaps not, but it is something to be understood. And now that we understand it, we cannot go back to not knowing. The galaxy will never fight wars the same way again." As the human delegation prepared to leave, Sarah realized they weren't just returning to Earth with trade agreements and territorial recognition. They were returning with the knowledge that humanity had somehow, without firing a shot or threatening anyone, fundamentally altered the balance of power in the galaxy. The most peaceful first contact in human history had accidentally established them as the dominant military force in known space, simply because everyone else had learned how humans thought about war. It was, she reflected, probably the most human outcome possible, achieving total victory through unintended consequences.